There are many sayings concerning the cyclical nature of weak and strong men in society and the effects they have on the world. In the world of Ice and Fire, it seemed these observations were similarly applicable. The leading great house of the West was neither respected nor revered, leading to dissent, masked insurrection, and mockery. However, the son of the bannerlord would not stand for the meekness of his father, and when his time to rule came, rule he did. He brought ruthlessness to the region, yes, but also prosperity, and the respect his house had so sorely been missing. This man was Tywin Lannister. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Exploring Fiction. Spurred and spurned by the timidity of his father, Tywin Lannister swore to be a strong leader. He succeeded. He quelled a revolt, aided another, was the voice and hand of multiple kings, and the most influential man in the realm. His allies and enemies alike respected him, and he too struck intimidation into their hearts in equal measure. Tywin built an empire from a failing family, but the golden exterior was not so lustrous from within. The bonds of kinship were strained, enough for a patricide to take place at Tywin's own expense. He was in the midst of a victorious war, ruling over the shoulder of his grandsons with his external enemies gone from the land. But he was pierced by a crossbow bolt on the chamber pot, ending the life of one of the most powerful men in Westeros in shameful fashion. Hated by some and adored by others, Tywin Lannister was universally seen as great, but his death was not so. Instead, it was a humiliation to himself, his house, and everything for which he stood. In the end, his end stood in stark contradiction to his beginning. So, who exactly is Tywin Lannister, and why is he such an interesting character? Let's explore. Tywin Lannister was born in 242 AC to Lord Tytos Lannister and his wife, Lady Jane Marbrand, at Casterly Rock. He was the firstborn child of the pair, followed by his brother Kevin, his sister Jenna, another brother Tyget, and a final younger brother, Garyon. Even from his youngest years, Tywin was considered ferocious and headstrong, evident when he was the only member of the Lannister family to deride the betrothal of his sister to the second son of the Crossing. In part due to this outburst, Lord Tytos sent Tywin to King's Landing to mingle amongst the other young lords and ladies in waiting, and once there, he took quickly to both the royal family and the other children of the great houses. Tywin was knighted before his 18th birthday, and so when the War of the Ninepenny Kings across the Narrow Sea called for a great host, Tywin was amongst them, along with his squiring brothers. He fought admirably, if not unremarkably, but most importantly, honored the realm when he was granted permission to knight his best friend, Prince Aerys Targaryen. But upon returning home, another more subtle war awaited. Tywin, along with his brothers, decided that the passivity of the Lannisters in their own lands would no longer be tolerated, and that their house was past due for an ascension back to greatness. Taking the lead, Tywin demanded repayment of all loans borrowed from their house, or else held a hostage until the money could be repaid. His brother Kevin scoured the Westerlands, ridding the roads, hills, and forests of bandits and robbers. The two most defiant houses, Rain and Tarbeck, reared their heads at the brothers' supposed affronts, and Tywin had little patience for such insolence. In the year 261 AC, while his father ruled only in name, Tywin ordered Lord Roger Rain and Lord Walderon Tarbeck back to Casterly Rock to attest to their avoidance of debts and overall disrespect for House Lannister. Both refused. Instead, they shrugged aside their sworn allegiance to the house, and Tywin rallied an army without his father's blessing. First, he defeated the Tarbecks, destroying their home, and when Lord Rain retreated to Castamere, Tywin displayed the heights of his tactical brilliance for the first time. Rather than lay siege upon his former bannermen, he simply diverted a nearby river toward the castle, drowning the entire family and forming the basis for one of the most haunting ballads in the realm. From that day forth, the ruthlessness of Tywin Lannister was known across the entirety of the Seven Kingdoms. A former ally, and now a powerful man in his own right, recognized Tywin's actions. Aerys Targaryen II, now king, was impressed with the eldest son of the Rock, and called upon his friend to serve as Hand of the King. Tywin accepted, and became the youngest man to ever occupy the position. Under Tywin's watchful and wealthy eye, Westeros was not just peaceful, but prosperous, for the first 10 years of Aerys' rule. The King's Hand personally benefited during this time as well, as in 263 AC he married his cousin, Lady Joanna Lannister. 3 years later, she birthed twins, Cersei and Jaime. In 267 AC, the time of Tywin Lannister had come. His father, Lord Tytos, suffered a ruptured heart in a rush to see one of his mistresses, and so the gold, land, and influence of Casterly Rock were passed to his eldest son. During this period, however, the king and his hand became more combative, and tensions rose between the two friends. Also in this time, his wife Joanna perished giving birth to the imp, Tyrion Lannister, and from that moment onward, Tywin let little of his lighter side shine through. He blamed his newest son for his wife's death, an unfortunate truth that produced major repercussions in his later years. Through various events, actions, and coincidences, it soon became clear that the Seven Kingdoms favored Tywin over their king, Aerys. Favorable cheers filled the air for the former, while only obliging applause was given to the latter. When King Aerys rode to Duskendale to discuss economic concerns with the lord of the town, he was captured and held hostage, only to be rescued by a member of his Kingsguard. However, Aerys had undergone this endeavor at Tywin's suggestion, and he soon came to believe that his hand had been scheming behind his back to orchestrate his downfall. Aerys was growing madder by the day, and Tywin was one of the many devils he saw in the shadows. In an effort to cripple his grandest advisor, he named Sir Jaime to the Kingsguard, plucking Tywin's heir from under him. The Lord of the Rock resigned and retreated west, never to reconcile with the king again. Before long, the king's madness extended beyond just suspicion of Tywin, and his worrisome ways in part prompted a call to arms by his bannermen. Robert's rebellion shook the Seven Kingdoms, but Lord Tywin and the Westerners refused the call of both sides, opting instead for caution and calculation from their golden homes. After the Battle of the Trident, in which Robert Baratheon slew Prince Rhaegar Targaryen in single combat, it was clear which side would emerge victorious. Shrewdly, Lord Tywin rallied his forces and rode directly for King's Landing, where he was welcomed with open arms and open gates through the convincing whispers of Grand Maester Pycelle in the king's ear. The forces of the Rock sacked the city, and Sir Jaime Lannister himself slew the king, and Tywin presented Lord-turned-King Robert Baratheon with the wrapped bodies of Prince Rhaegar's children as a token of loyalty. With hardly any work or bloodshed, at least compared to the other houses and kingdoms, the Lannisters had become endeared to the new regime, earning Tywin a place of respect in the new royal troop, and his daughter Cersei a queenship, as she married Robert Baratheon. Lord Tywin returned home to serve as Warden of the West, far richer and far wiser. Still, all was not right in his own house. His son Tyrion, whom he loathed for causing Joanna's death in childbirth, had wed a common woman, Tysha. In the eyes of the leading lion, such matrimony brought back memories of a house that was ridiculed and trodden upon, and that was something Tywin would never see again. At his father's command, Jaime named the girl a prostitute, and turned her over to the House Garrison. It was an act of complete humiliation toward the imp, supposedly done to save House Lannister, but in truth, spelling the beginning of the cracks in the impenetrable stone. Tyrion never forgave his father, especially after suffering further castigations at his hand. As Tywin adored his elder two children, the crown adored him. Robert Baratheon was a man of little caution, and he spent the gold from the coffers in astounding quantities. To cover the king's careless tendencies, Tywin lent his own coin to the royal stores, placing House Lannister in powerful standing over the seat of Westeros itself, and he atop it all. Tywin Lannister was a tall, broad man, bald atop his head, but sporting golden whiskers down the sides of his face. Even his eyes, which were a pale green, sparkled with speckles of gold. In battle he was a stirring sight, adorning steel plate colored crimson with gilded finish. A golden cloak drifted behind his frame, and atop his head was a scarlet helm shaped in the display of a roaring lion, with eyes made of ruby. At his hip sat a longsword with a golden pommel, with which he was skilled enough to command respect upon a battlefield. But the majority of the respect for Tywin Lannister came off the fighting plains, and instead in the throne rooms and round tables of politics. He was an adamant fighter for his house, seeking only the glory of House Lannister. Tywin was persistent, ruthless, and almost unusually resourceful, proving a priceless ally and a cunning enemy. Though he laughed little, he was not so dull as some other lords and ladies. Still, there was little to laugh about when so much work still sat in wait. Tywin Lannister first appears in A Song of Ice and Fire in the opening novel, A Game of Thrones. Of course, though he cares little for his son Tyrion, Tywin sees the imp's capture at the hands of Catelyn Stark as a slight against his precious house, and so personally appoints Sir Gregor Clegane to pillage the Riverlands in retaliation. Tywin means to draw the attention of Lord Eddard Stark himself, so he may capture the Warden of the North and New Hand of the King, and return him to his family in exchange for Tyrion. However, Tywin's plans rise above the intelligence of lesser men, and his son Jaime thwarts the scheme when he wounds Eddard in the streets of King's Landing. And so, Eddard names Lord Beric Dondarrion as the man to bring down the mountain, while he sits maimed in the capital. But Eddard's time as King's Hand abruptly ends with the death of Robert Baratheon, and the man's son Joffrey appoints Tywin as his chief advisor. War brews in the Riverlands, and both Tywin and Jaime lead separate forces against their newfound foes. Tyrion, himself freed, joins his father's host, and they burn and plunder countless villages and towns in their vengeful yet calculated conquest. Despite his renown, experience, and prowess, however, Lord Tywin is outmaneuvered by the young and equally vengeful Robb Stark, and can only watch as his small victory at the Battle of the Green Fork spells defeat for his son Jaime at the Battle of the Whispering Wood. With his grandest son captured and his nephew dealing in madness, for Joffrey has executed Lord Eddard in the capital, Tywin understands he must quickly quell his defeats before they reach unstoppable proportions. He dispatches Tyrion to King's Landing to serve as acting hand of the king in his absence, while he turns to Harrenhal, where he plans to sit in the heights of the Haunted Towers, managing the war from its center. There Tywin remains to begin the second novel, A Clash of Kings. Just as he intended, he commands his forces from the center of the battlefield, though he is continually stymied by the upstart northern king, Robb Stark. The young wolf turns not toward Harrenhal to face Tywin directly, but instead follows a bolder, and far more successful strategy. Robb leads his men into the heart of the Westerlands, returning Tywin's treatment of the Riverlands to his own home. Though the King's Hand is perturbed by this outcome, he keeps a level head as he has always done. The forces of King Renly Baratheon sputter with the death of their charismatic leader, and most join his elder brother Stannis. But Tywin also sees that the middle Baratheon brother seeks to reclaim his home of Storm's End, and so gambles by turning in pursuit of Robb to the west. Harrenhal suffers much bloodshed after his departure, but Tywin cares not for such inconveniences. Instead, he faces his front, where Sir Edmure Tully stands between himself and the Westerlands. Edmure seeks to trap Tywin between Riverrun and Harrenhal, and crush the man's superior forces, and in his own scheme, he succeeds. However, through this delay and slight defeat, Tywin learns of Stannis' success at Storm's End, and intent to take King's Landing. And so, determining the Baratheon Lord the greater threat, he retreats from the current course and meets with the Lords of the Reach disloyal to Stannis. They form an alliance, and beside Lord Mace Tyrell, Tywin leads the Lannister-Tyrell alliance to King's Landing, where they arrive at the direst moment to save the crown in the Battle of the Blackwater. Stannis is driven back, the capital is saved, and Lord Tywin Lannister is named hero. King Joffrey requests his grandfather resume as acting King's Hand, and Tywin now sits in a new seat in a new castle, but commands exactly the same. In A Storm of Swords, the war for Westeros is not yet waning, and Tywin Lannister remains an integral player in the great bloody game. While Robb Stark reels from the foiling of his grand plan by his own uncle, and Stannis nurses his wounds after the defeat at the Blackwater, Tywin lavishes in the grandeur of victory, which is largely credited to him. He appoints his son Tyrion, who barely survived the ordeal, to the position of Master of Coin, notably denying his request to be named heir to Casterly Rock. Always plotting, Tywin then commands the Imp to take Sansa Stark to wife, both so he may inherit Winterfell, but also to thwart the Tyrells from plucking the Daughter of the North from his grasp. Sobbing, Sansa is forced into marriage with Tyrion, who himself feels more pity and shame than excitement. Yet, a more important pact has been struck in Tywin's home province, for the young wolf has taken the Lady Jane Westerling to wife. An opportunity arises, and Tywin digs his lion claws into the exposed flesh of his enemy. He learns of this union from Jane's mother, while also drawing Lord Roose Bolton to his side as the man releases the maligned Sir Jaime Lannister from captivity. Greatest of all, Tywin earns the loyalty of the Freys, who were slighted by Robb's broken marriage vow. Calling upon all these allies, Lord Tywin orchestrates a foul plan to effectively end the war. It succeeds. At his uncle's wedding, an apology for his fractured word, Robb Stark, his mother Catelyn, and nearly their entire host are butchered by the spurned Freys, who are themselves prompted into action by the mind and might of Tywin Lannister. The young wolf is dead, and the war along with him. Just as Tywin hoped, the Lannisters are victorious once more. King Joffrey Baratheon, however, lives not long into his reign of victory. After Tywin gifts him a Valyrian steel blade reforged from the melted ice, the boy suffers asphyxiation and death at his own wedding, and all blame the embittered dwarf, Tyrion. Tywin, most of all, holds contempt for his son, though it is veiled better than that of Cersei. Along with Prince Oberyn Martell and Lord Mace Tyrell, Tywin sits as one of 3 judges for Tyrion's trial, but can do little in dispensing justice when the man requests trial by combat. Cersei, her own brother's prosecutor, elects the Mountain Sir Gregor Clegane as her champion. Spying an opportunity for revenge for the death of his sister, Prince Oberyn Martell volunteers to fight for the Imp. In the melee, Gregor confesses to the horrid crimes committed during the sack of King's Landing, and is poisoned by the spear of the Viper. But Oberyn is brought down by the Behemoth, and perishes, dooming Tyrion to death along with him. Fearing heightened animosity on behalf of Dorne, Tywin calls for the execution of Gregor, but only once he is healed from poison. Still, the ailment is one not even Grand Maester Pycelle can abate. Deeper in the dungeons of the Red Keep, Tyrion awaits his execution. Saviors arrive, however, in the unlikeliest forms: his brother, Sir Jaime Lannister, and Lord Varys the Spider. As the trio traverses the hidden underbelly of the castle, Jaime admits to his brother that those many years ago, Tywin had forced his eldest son to name Tyrion's first wife a prostitute, when the reality was not so sinful. It is the end of tolerance for Tyrion, and he forcibly commands Varys to lead him beneath the Tower of the Hand. The Imp climbs the secret ladder into his father's chambers, and finds the prostitute Shae, his own former lover and one he believed held in contempt by Tywin, in the hand of the king's own bed. After strangling her to death, Tyrion stalks to the privy, where he finds Tywin seated. Crossbow in hand, Tyrion exchanges harsh words with his father, and finally looses a bolt into his bowels. And so the grandest and most revered lord in the land, the great Tywin Lannister, meets his end on the chamber pot. In A Feast for Crows, the corpse of the Woman of the Night is cleared hastily from his bed, but Tywin's corpse holds a stench so great, many wonder whether a curse has settled upon the man, waiting to be passed on to his surviving family. For such a grand life, it is a pitiful end indeed. The reputation of Lord Tywin Lannister precedes him wherever he goes. This is for good reason. When he was born, the House of Lannister was the great house of the West, of course, but none thought it truly great. His father's bannermen were antagonistic and mocking behind the back of Lord Tytos, subverting the timid man and displaying general disdain and irreverence toward him at every turn. And as a boy, Tywin watched closely. He recalled the countless occasions when the Lannisters were made to look foolish by their own subjects, and he witnessed with his own eyes the pathetic meekness of his Lord Father. So when Tywin himself becomes Lord of Casterly Rock, it is not so. He restores order to the West, as well as respect for his own house. His suave ways earn the coffers much coin, but it is obedience he desires. To any rebellious or unconvinced houses, Tywin Lannister displays his ruthless resolve, refusing to balk at the prospect of death in exchange for respect. He extinguishes Houses Rain and Tarbeck, deeds that are immortalized in song which follows him wherever he goes. Throughout his multiple reigns as Warden of the West and Hand of the King, Tywin ascends to greater heights of renown, until it seems all across the Seven Kingdoms both quiver and bow at the mention of his very name. Greatest of all, though, Tywin cares for his family. It is not the paternal, true care displayed by his counterparts in other kingdoms, but the care for reputation and maintaining the level of respect he had toiled so greatly to establish. So, despite his supposed love for fellow Lannisters, it is this unbreakable standard that causes him to loathe his son Tyrion. To Tywin, the imp is a stain on the Lannister name, a weakness for enemies to exploit and deride. So too is the rumored incest of Cersei and Jaime, but Tyrion's dwarfism is no whispered hearsay. It is plain as day, and Tywin cannot hide it without cause. The death of King Joffrey, despite the horrific impact on Tywin's beloved family, provides this cause. But Tyrion escapes in the dead of night, clambering his way to the Tower of the Hand. He finds a prostitute in his father's bed, proving Tywin a hypocrite. For all Tyrion's life, Tywin has chastised him for sleeping with easy women, and even scarred him for life by humiliating his first wife. Now, the imp finds such a girl in the bed of this unbreakable man, the ultimate nail in the encroaching gilded coffin. Father and son confront each other while the former is relieving himself, and a crossbow bolt to the bowels fells the most accomplished man alive. Tywin loses his life in the most indecent way and place possible, only made worse when his corpse rots before his burial rites. By all accounts, Tywin Lannister is villainous. He paradoxically cares about his family and his name more than anyone else, but strives to admonish any imperfection to maintain the Lannister reputation. In doing so, he drives his own son to commit patricide, an action with the opportunity to be avoided at many uncertain turns. Tywin is a hypocrite, for he spends his entire life preaching about the contemptible nature of whores, yet is found abed with one in his final moments. But by most, those who only see the shimmering, admirable exterior, he is strong and ruthless. Either way, Tywin Lannister, a man considered at least respectable by all, if not akin to a god by some, suffers a fate far worse than death on a battlefield. He is killed in one of his few moments of vulnerability, bringing both shame and humanity to a man thought infallible. The Lord of Casterly Rock for the majority of the War of the Five Kings had no simple task. He raised his house from joke to giant, creating legends and setting up a life of power and plenty for his descendants on his way. Tywin Lannister and his reputation were common knowledge, especially amongst his fellow highborn, but those who knew him best sometimes viewed him differently. The man was so utterly focused on image that he lacked any empathy for those around him, and it caused his premature downfall. Not only was he dispatched by one of the men he hated most, he met his end in embarrassing fashion which lasted past his departure from the world. Though none were inclined to soon forget the deeds of Tywin Lannister, none would surely forget the pathetic manner of his death either. Tywin Lannister was granted no dignity in defeat. So, that's all for this video. Leave a comment with your thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new here, I'd love to have you. Visit my website russellawellsauthor.com for exclusive reviews, fiction, and more, and sign up for my mailing list for free exclusive content. The links are in the description below. And, like always, I will see you next time.